that and the World Food Programme. I thank all the attendees as well as our distinguished resource persons for joining us today. So we might have some challenges due to the electricity. So we are recording this session and we will be sharing it with all the participants who have registered. We are trying to provide bilingual translations, Sinhala and Tamil. So if you look at your screen, there would be a small icon called interpretation. So when you click on the English or Sinhala or Tamil, you will be able to listen to that. අපේ මේ මෙනු එකේ කෙරවරේ තියෙනවා ඉන්ටර්ප්‍රිටේෂන් කියලා එකක්. ඒ ඉන්ටර්ප්‍රිටේෂන් කියන එකේ සිංහල කියන අයිකන් එක ක්ලික් කරාම අපිට සිංහල මාධ්‍යයෙන් මේකට සවන් දෙන්න පුළුවන්කම තියෙනවා. අපි එහෙනම් let's start the session. I will give you a very brief overview. So today we are going through, as all of you know, very tough financial times. So we believe that there should be some macroeconomic interventions that has to be done at government or rather intergovernmental level to solve some sort of solutions to this problem. However, we are talking about how we could support communities during these challenging times. As a country, we have gone through very difficult times and we have come up after those. So I think we have the same strength as a nation to withstand these problems and become a better country in future. So we take this simile of spring. If you stretch a spring or if you push the spring, it will come back to the usual shape. And sometimes it can come to a better shape. So that is the whole idea of community resilience. The community resilience is the ability of a community to bounce back and recover using its own resources, and also the ability of groups or communities to cope with external shocks and stressors as a result of social, environmental, and political change. Though it is not there originally in this definition, I think we can definitely add economic change as well. I think some of the key people who were involved in defining this definition as well as developing the community resilience framework are there. So I would leave them to discuss this further. So we want to look at this issue from a community resilience point of view. How can we, as the civil sector, corporate sector, religious organizations, and the general public could help people to withstand and recover from the immense financial challenges that we are facing right now. So this is the framework that we will be using to discuss this. Indu will be discussing this and explaining this in detail, but just to scratch it on the surface, community resilience framework and the definition I showed you was developed by the Disaster Management Center Sri Lanka. So this is in response to our resilience as a nation to the 2004 tsunami, how we develop our institutional framework to perform better. And we have achieved a lot in the field of disaster management. So this has few key components. It has the community at the center. So whatever the work we do, whatever the intervention we do, the community should be the focus. And then they should be provided with adequate risk knowledge. The risk knowledge could be to disasters, emergencies, conflict, or the financial crisis that we are discussing. But individual and the community, simply because they are knowledgeable about the issue, are not empowered or not resilience is built. So we have to make changes in the social, physical, economic, human, and environmental subsystems. And what we are experiencing right now is probably in the economic subsystem, but they are linked to all other subsystems in the ecosystem. And above all, governance is very important. So participation, representation, and leadership are very important issues that we have to discuss if we want to make community resilient. So this is basically what we are going to use as the conceptual framework, and I'm not going to discuss anything more about this. I will leave the other distinguished speakers to talk about it more. So another important thing is community resilience is not about disasters and emergencies or about disaster response. There is a very close link between community resilience and development. So they are very closely linked. We are not talking only about from a disaster resilience point, disaster response point of view, or at this particular juncture in economic response, but we are also thinking about how we could move forward or how we could use the community resilience approach in making our communities move towards the direction of development. So with that, let me move on to the next speaker. The next speaker would be, would be Mr. Indu Aberatna. He's a very good friend of us and he represents the World Food Program. He is an advocate in building community resilience. He has immense experience in the community resilience framework development in the Sri Lankan context as well as its utilization. And he has worked under different complex emergency situations. So without much ado, I would hand over the forum to Mr. Indu Aberatna. He would be talking about how the whole concept of community resilience could be used as a country, especially addressing food security, which is a very important issue that we are facing right now. Over to you, Indu.
Thank you, Dr. Noel. Dear colleagues, distinguished panel members, good evening to everyone. Let me share my slide first. Can you confirm that you can see the slide?
Yes, we can see it. Indu, if you could put it into the slideshow mode. Yeah. Yes, we see it now, not in the presenter mode. We are okay.
Okay. Just hold on a second. Well, give me a second to take out my note also. Give me a second, Noel. Thank you very much, and I hope I'm clear to everyone. Dr. Noel, can you confirm?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you and hear you.
Still, are you seeing the slide?
Now we lost it, but earlier when you were showing it, we saw it. Now we don't see the full screen.
But you see the slide itself, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'll talk for a while. With this, you can see my first slide, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry for the technical error. And today, as Dr. Noel mentioned, that we are at a very crucial milestone. On one side, we have this economic crisis, short of essentials, the price hikes, and not only that, on top of everything, the people's tension everywhere. It's not limiting to the Sri Lankan context, but we see it's beyond a country. It's a global kind of frequent phenomena at this stage. It because of many consequences. We had the COVID pandemic for long time, really unexpected way, and aggravated by various other phenomena as well as vulnerabilities and increasing or exponential increase of vulnerabilities day by day. These these conditions exponentially impacting the coping strategies of most vulnerable population, especially in Sri Lanka at this point, with exemplifying the importance of people's abilities to bounce back with continuing shocks and stressors, and stabilizing the household food security, economic security as well. I think based on our deliberation understanding, we are at a very crucial juncture where that community resilience is at the helm of the development. Is a very critical, important factor that we might importantly discuss, deliberate, and bring into the mainstream, whereby that all these systems will support the resilience of the people. So with that, I think Noel brought us a kind of definition of resilience in one aspect. Once again, that I would like to reiterate that the capacity or the coping capacity to ensure the shock stresses does not have or do not have long-lasting adverse development consequences. It's not only development consequences, but how the communities and as a whole is as Noel mentioned, bouncing back from the shocks and stresses, which is important. I would like to highlight the WFP's the definition of the resilience based on WFP resilience policy in 2015, but we can add more and more with all these dimensions what we have discussed, what we have seen from the previous presentation. Let me have a look on that. I mean, this is another dimension which I would like to present. The broader look of the resilience in different stages, different levels. So that it says that capacities or coping strategies in three different tiers. One is absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. So it is important that we need to understand these different elements of the resilience, and based on those key aspects, we could work with different agencies, communities, so on and so forth in building resilience. I will take one by one. What is absorptive capacity? This capacity covers that coping strategies of individuals, households, or communities themselves to absorb, the stresses or the shocks time to time without hampering much of their economic and food security. So that is in the usual cases which we have seen, that people are absorbing these various types of shocks and stressors, where they could use their own capacities, their own knowledges, their own systems to absorb it. And then next stage is adaptive. So it is beyond the someone's capacity, So it needs certain preparations, certain advanced adaptation measures. So it is about learning from the experience, and just to adjust our responses according to the external condition that might anticipating and forecasted. So that is what we call adaptive capacity. And then transformative, which is in a serious case like this, like the Sri Lankan community, or the Sri Lankan whole Sri Lanka is experiencing at this point. So where that the whatever the circumstances, the surrounding environment is not going to cope with such situation based on continuous shocks and stresses. So we know that for last 3 years, and we are into the fourth year of that, from Easter attack, then to COVID, and to economic crisis what we are experiencing. It is enormous at this particular point. So whereby we need to have system changes, changes of the culture, changes of the mainstream, changes of the development agenda, changes to the social cultures, and changes to everything to be adaptive into that particular situation we might call transformative capacity, which can be at community level, at local level, subnational level, and national level, and also it's beyond from national level. It can be global level as well. So what kind of shocks and stresses is important that we need to understand. So as Novel has mentioned, that we are having economic vulnerabilities, social vulnerabilities, geophysical vulnerabilities, health vulnerabilities, and various other governance, political conflict, which we are experiencing. And on top of that, we do have the climatic vulnerability, which we are discussing in the last decade or so, where that current vulnerabilities are further aggravating, and it is increase of those vulnerabilities, or rather we may call progression of vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities or shocks and stresses can be categorized into two: covariate shocks and idiosyncratic shocks. So what it does mean? So this covariate shocks means that it is perceived at individual or household level, where that same area is experiencing such kind of shocks like others. So which we can get examples like floods or droughts, which we are seeing. But idiosyncratic shocks are when household experience typical situation into that particular community, household, community, or a country. It is what we categorize as this. So this is important to understand how best that we are dealing with this. Well, understanding further about correlation between vulnerabilities and resilience. So, as Noel has mentioned, that in the community resilience framework, we have devised the community into community subsystems. What does that mean? So, as you may know, that vicious cycle of the poverty, which is describing various capitals: social capital, economic capital, environmental capital, uh, financial capital, and human capital. So bringing those elements, which we call that these are providing different services to communities, different services to us, so which is hampered by any shocks and stresses, which will be affecting the whole chemistry of community function. So this is the correlation in between these subsystems and the community function. So whereby you can see that community systems in one hand, and then the shocks or stresses coming into influence that particular systems based on various dimensions: exposure, sensitivities, and then adaptive capacities. So I'm not going to try to talk much on the technicalities of this, but you might be understanding what exposure is, what sensitivities are, and then what is adaptive capacity based on our experiences and learning throughout. So this defines various stages of the aforementioned capacities: absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. So whereby that either you will end up with build back better, or just build back, or just recover, or it's a downfall. When the resilience is very low, that you will see the downfall, which is really matching to the Sri Lankan context at this point. So where our economic situation is having downfall, where our coping capacities are in downfall, and all these subsystems are being really hampered, and whereby the people are suffering. And once again, linking to the community resilience framework or the conceptual architecture of it, it talks the same vicious cycle of poverty, but underneath of that, this is just like a pyramid, that we do have subsystems in the middle, and on the bottom of that we do have this governance or the structures, which is an important and critical element which provides certain support and entire enabling environment for all these subsystems. So we do have environmental subsystems, social subsystems, physical, economic, and human subsystems, which functions interrelatively, but they are having unique features as well. So in this, we specifically, consider a community functioning as a group of people share common physical environment, resources, and services. And in the resilience, what we talked about, what makes the community to bounce back from a disruption quickly, or shock, get out from a shock or stressor quickly. And for that, what we need, they need to have different resources and abilities to apply to reorganize themselves based on their kind of environment, and of course the capacities what they are having. And within that, the leadership, participation, representation is very critical in that particular sense. Then leaning into the critical elements to consider in the community resilience framework in this particular stage. So it is important that community knowledge, the risk knowledge, to anticipate and adopt and create their own different diversified livelihood options or diversified economic options. And not only that, social protection systems and social networks, which is really bring adequate support to all these subsystems, and of course the communities at large. And we need environmental stability to support livelihood. We know that climate change is battering entire world, but it is important that how best that we would take in the conservation of the nature, build the ecosystems, and working with the nature. It is important that to minimize additional hazards and stressors which might arise because of the fragile environment. And the advancement of geophysical services to improve the food systems within better resilience infrastructure and market systems. So these key elements are very critical in the physical infrastructure for the resilience. And of course, not only that, we need to be in good health. So wellness is critical element in this, so that we need to have the access to good health systems, and of course affordability as well. So within that, social insurances, and of course that people influencing abilities also will play a critical role. And as Noel mentioned in the beginning, that within the resilience framework, the economic atmosphere is also a very crucial factor. So micro financial tools for smallholder farmers, small and medium enterprises, where that our speakers will take up, and also other livelihood groups as well. So, to be considered to really cope with economic shocks locally and globally. And within these parameters, the adequate governance structure will play a crucial role. So we need to have better governance structures with the people's participation, where that people's can be voiced, people knowledge can be used for different development aspects, which is very important. Then I would like to lean into the relationship of resilience to food security and nutrition. Uh, let's see that how the WFP describes the food security and nutrition is influenced by the vulnerabilities and resilience capacities, or rather we may call coping capacities of individuals, households, communities, institutions, or system in the face of shock or stressor. Well, within that, it is important to understand what we are talking as food systems. So, looking at the FAO illustration of food systems, as you can see, there are many elements of food systems, which is linking to the community subsystems as well eventually. So, it talks about the production, processing, consumption, distribution, markets, and whatnot. So all in all, this building the entire food system from the smallholder farmer or the poor vulnerable people to the national or global markets. And let's see that how different vulnerabilities is going to influence or uh, hamper these particular elements of food systems. So throughout last few years of the context in Sri Lanka, as you could see that I would like to bring different actors and different types of impacts uh, which have been factored to uh, bring in negative consequences to the entire subsystem. You see that producers, the family-based farming, or various other small to medium enterprises. So how disruptive the supply chains, the fertilizer, subsidiaries, demand and production, and labor market, and of course transportation, and various other diseases as well, and we have seen that armyworm impact quite recently, and these are directly impacting the entire process of the food system. So I'm not going to talk all these elements, you can see, and we will share the presentation as well. So these are the other kind of impacts in different actors like processors, retailers, vendors, consumers. As you very well know that, like consumers like us, how much we are impacted because of non-availability of different varieties of food, different varieties of commodities, and the price hikes, and various other things. On top of that, the tax and whatever the economic conditions will that bring more and more risk and consequences to the household food security and economic security as well. Well, what we can do uh, as WFP, or as humanitarian workers, or maybe in general, uh, as a common citizen of a country, that we can think of how best that we could develop the community resilience, as I was speaking about, within these three tiers of capacities: absorptive, adaptive, and transformative. So within these three tiers, it is important to understand which category we are in, as we understand that it is a beyond capacities of a country, whereby we need transformative capacities, transformative systems. We need different policies. We need different development approach. We need to bring adequate regulations. We need to think about the participation of vulnerable people, bring in their local knowledge, and of course developing robust community-centric approach towards building resilience within the people, not within the people, within the community, within the institution, within the entire atmosphere of a country, which is very, very important. So the governance will play a crucial role in this, where that participation, leadership, and bringing different dimensions, where we need to think of securing the resilience features, and whereby bringing the food security and economic security. And talking about the entire food system, which I was discussing earlier, about different subsystems of the communities, and of course which is interlinked in the entire food system. So I have jot down various elements which can refer to have the resilience food systems. In the environmental elements, we need to really think about our land use, water management, and various environmental conservations where we are working with the nature. And then financial elements, in the local level, we need to think about the seeds, fertilizer subsidies, social protection, and insurance schemes, as well as financial elements. And then physical elements, which plays a critical factor within this: the irrigation systems, access roads, labor, tools, so which are really important to consider within this. And not only that, as I was explaining, well-being of the people, access to advanced knowledge, techniques, which are essential elements in human subsystem. And then social elements, the seed banks, food reserves, mutual support, whereas it is important that you play a key role within the community, facilitating the various functions of the community itself. And then community structures, networks, and not only that, which are linked into the development instruments of the government as well, like the various administrative instruments, administrative agencies, which also important that all these community structures are linked. And on top of that, the critical factor is risk knowledge. So how best that we need to understand this, anticipate, and taking response options. Within that, what we could do, what resilience responses to overcome this challenging situation, which is important that we need to further take care of the local development, just not local development, but it is community centric local development, based on local dimensions, vulnerabilities, and coping strategies, thinking about entire food system actors. And then the risk sensitivities is a must to be incorporated into the local level planning, especially in the irrigation, agriculture, entire supply chain, so on and so forth. And people centric approach, which is very important, as I was explaining, and bringing their local knowledge is another factor that important element when we are considering the resilient responses. And then strengthening the social protection schemes, which is important, and different subgroups use different resilience responses, like the cross-cutting issues like gender, age, disability, ethnicity, whatnot. We could mention that all these are part and parcel, or should be part and parcel of this entire strategy development, and bringing adequate emphasis on the local development. But yet we are having challenges, and we need to understand these challenges and take anticipatory actions. So one is enabling environment, which is very critical. The governance structures plays very crucial role. So for which we need to further thinking of establishing adequate policies to incorporate risk into development planning. And the other challenge could be about information, the availability of information, not only at the national level or the global level, but how best that will be accessible to the last mile. So last mile communication, early warning system, and of course understanding risk is a critical challenge which we need to think of, where that it will create more and more enabling environment for the smallholder farmers, and adequate strategies and resources for prevention and mitigation. So these are, sectoral approach, or the cohesive sectoral approach should be coming in, and integrated plan should be coming in. And then with anything can be beyond, like now for us. So where which we need to still think of preparedness, and preparedness for response, and preparedness for adverse situation. So it is important that anticipate, forecast, and make our environment to be really really capable to respond to these crises together with the communities, or the community capacity should be linked and developed to face these stresses and shocks with adequate adaptive, absorptive, adaptive, and transformative capacities with different schemes. So with that, I will stop. I think I have taken a little bit more, but since that is very much linked to the first presentation, I think I have taken into deep dive of the elements of resilience. And with that, I will hand over back to the host. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Indu, for that very elaborate presentation on community resilience. And we realize that it is even much more deeper than what is expressed in our community resilience framework of Sri Lanka, especially when you are using it for food security. We have to really go into details, and then you elaborated how different sectors should be working at this time to address the resilience needs. And also you mentioned very clearly that at different levels of shock, we should have different stages of resilience. So that is really a good start for us to discuss. So we will use this framework that Indu very clearly mentioned throughout our presentation. Thank you very much, Indu, for your time. And there are some questions there are some questions actually we registered. When the participants registered, they put in their questions because some were not sure whether they will be able to come, so we could go through them. And yes, all the presentations with the permission of the presenters, we will share with you. Okay, while thanking Indu for that excellent presentation and the very nice introduction and the orientation and framing everything from community resilience point of view, now I have the great honor of inviting Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne. So I don't need to introduce him. He is one of my great teachers and president of the Sarvodaya Movement, and also he's the co-chair of the health cluster that were activated by the United Nations system. So he's very active in the response to any humanitarian emergency, in addition to the developmental approach, the historical development approach that Sarvodaya Movement has been inherited and continuing. So without much ado, over to you, Dr. Vinya Ariyaratne. I will like you to focus on role of the civil society, organizations, and religious leaders in helping and building community resilience at this time. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Novil, for that introduction, and good evening to all of you who are joining this webinar today. And Novil, thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure, as always, to be part of such dialogues which are very relevant to what's happening in the country and the world today. So you have asked me to reflect on the role of religious leaders and civil society organizations during the current challenging economic times. Actually, the crisis that is unfolding in Sri Lanka that we are experiencing today is not just an economic crisis. It's a combination of a social, economic, and political crisis, which is unprecedented, I think, in our lifetime. So we are all in it, and let's try to see how we can adopt the resilience model in facing this crisis in Sri Lanka today. So Indu gave a very in-depth and a very clear analysis of the framework. So I would be, of course, following this framework, but bringing in our own analysis and conceptual underpinnings of our work as well. So I have been asked 4 questions. The first is, which elements of the community resilience framework could the religious leaders and the civil society leaders influence during the current challenging financial times? So one is, of course, the whole framework is centered around the community, which I thought was fantastic, because usually you don't see the community at the center or participation as a key element. Then also I see another important feature, which is addressing multiple determinants simultaneously. And also, actually, I had read the definition of resilience earlier as defined in our conceptual framework, but I didn't realize that though they haven't included economy in the definition, they have included political. So it's a very progressive thing, because what we are seeing now is a result of probably challenges related to poor governance or politics. So it's very important that this conceptual framework really relates to different factors, the underlying factors, the multiple determinants that lead to different disastrous situations and also different challenges in the social, economic, and political lives of communities. So why, if we remind ourselves of why this whole approach being, the importance of the approach being centered around communities, we all know that communities bear the direct impact of any disaster. They are also the first real-time responders to every disaster, whether it is a natural disaster or human-induced or what we call man-made disaster, or a biological disaster, or now the economic disaster. Let's also explore later how these things connect using one specific example. They are also aware of locally available resources. We know that in times of crisis, very difficult for external resources to reach communities. And in a situation where access is not readily available and also communications are disrupted, then of course, we have to rely on locally available resources, not just material resources, financial resources, but also human resources. Often we forget that the communities have the most authentic, time-tested knowledge of local risks and vulnerabilities. We think that because of all the data we have and all the computerized information that we have and all the technological devices that we have, we know everything. And the community, it's a matter of one-way communication. No, it's not. We all know that they have a lot of important indigenous knowledge that can be tapped, that can be also used in a very effective response and also in building resilience. So the coping mechanism often has to take into account this indigenous knowledge and also the reservoir of this information base. Then if we look at the other aspect of it, this question you asked me, Dr. Novil asked me, what the current challenging financial times. Now, of course, we know there's a financial or economic crisis. How does it manifest in real life? How does it manifest to all of us individually and as families and households? Directly, we are experiencing shortage of fuel. I'm struggling the last 2-3 days specifically in trying to respond to relief needs where there is the food insecurity now. So we are trying to help the families who are adversely affected, and before the new year, unless we do something, they are going to have a very miserable, most miserable new year probably in their own lifetime. So there's shortage of electricity, shortage of gas, shortage of food. So how does this manifest at the household level? We see simply many impacts, including health impact. One is food insecurity. This is a rapid survey done by the Medical Research Institute in partnership with UNICEF and WHO just last month. We see here a distribution of food insecurity by province in Sri Lanka. There are 9 provinces in Sri Lanka, and in the middle you get Sri Lanka's average. So you get food insecurity, which ranges from moderate to severe. In the central province, it is as high as 38%, and severe, if you look at the severe food insecurity, it's at 5.5. So like that, we can see a serious problem in food security in Sri Lanka. If you analyze it by district, if you take a district like Nuwara, 56% of the households surveyed do not have adequate food security for the members, the household members, followed by districts like Batticaloa, Trinco, Jaffna, Kandy, Mena, Matale, and Badulla. All at least 25% or above food insecurity. These are very, very alarming situation. So this is how, this one way how this is manifested. Now with the fuel crisis we are having, and also the foreign exchange crisis, we are having a shortage of medicines, shortage of medical supplies, surgeries have all the elective surgeries have been rescheduled because we don't have some of the most critical devices that are required for surgical operations. So we are in a very deep crisis when it comes to health sector as well. So what is my advice? I don't like to use the word advice, but I'm just reading the question as it is given here. What is your advice for civil society activists and religious leaders in promoting community resilience during the current challenging financial times? So my first response is be true leaders. We need leadership. Now we have to act in whatever the influence that we have, in the spheres of influence we have. Do the right thing, bring the knowledge to the people, identify what are the simple things that you can do to withstand. How can we use the available food without getting them spoiled or going to waste in the community? Can we take stock of what is available now? If there is a serious shutdown of everything, if there's zero electricity, if there's zero fuel, if there's zero communication, how can we survive? So this is where leadership comes, demands for leadership. So from the civil society, religious leaders, I am telling that this is the moment that you should demonstrate leadership, the same way that ordinary citizens from all walks of life took to the streets, still demonstrating, because that's the only way that they could express themselves, particularly the younger generation. So we have seen leaders emerging, coping mechanisms emerging, how to address certain needs in a crisis situation like this. So there is a space for us to learn as well. Public health professionals, medical professionals, this is the time to learn as well. Do and learn and do. Then the second thing is organize the community democratically. Use existing CBOs. This is governance of in the framework. One of the key elements is governance. So you really need to use existing institutional mechanisms, because then we can reach a larger number of communities in the least amount of time. Scientific information dissemination. With any crisis, you get misinformation and disinformation. So one of the important roles of a leader, a community leader, a professional, a religious leader, is using the trust that the communities have on you. You bring correct information, particularly when there's social media accessible to everyone. Within seconds, you can send across a wrong message. So here you should be the gatekeepers, where to the community you, in a most honest way, you say that this information is wrong. This information about the third dose or the boosted dose is wrong. This is the right information, right? If you have any doubts, this is the place where you can get clarification. So like that, passing on scientific information and addressing some myths, stigma, all that is part of our duty as community leaders. Then we have to facilitate evidence-based decision making in the community. There are instances where these community organizations need to take a decision whether they will do something, some intervention. What is the scientific basis of it? This is where the religious leaders and community leaders can facilitate. Inclusiveness, very important. Our society during the last 20-30 years have been divided along religious, ethnic, socio-economic lines. I think we need to unite. This crisis is also an opportunity for us to unite. We could see the last few days how people from all walks of life, all traditions, all faiths, all social classes coming together, express their desire for a change, express their desire for a better Sri Lanka. So I think this inclusiveness is very important in order to overcome the crisis. The Sinhalese only cannot give leadership and overcome this economic crisis. The Tamils only cannot. The Muslims only cannot. The Buddhists only cannot. The Christians or Hindu or Islamic, no one can do this alone. So we have to have that inclusiveness. Finally, promoting a holistic approach. We know from all our faiths that everything is interdependent. We are connected to each other. We are connected to each other as human beings. We are connected to our nature. We are connected to ourselves spiritually. All those things calls for a holistic approach, because you can't just say, by doing this only will fix, just by appointing a technically qualified person for the first time to a position which has been politicized for a long time will not fix the problem. You really need to have other systems also fixed. That's what I think Hindu also referred to as a system change towards resilience building from individual to the national level. So then the third question is, can you provide some examples of such interventions that you have carried out or are planning right now for this crisis? I said that it is manifested in different ways. Food insecurity is one. It is aggravated by the lack of fuel for cooking, right? I take that simple example. Now let's remind ourselves about food security. So food security we define as all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. It's not just filling the stomach. Last few months, we have seen increased sale of biscuits in poor socioeconomic areas in Sri Lanka. Why did that happen? Because the mothers, parents were feeding their children just to fill the stomach by giving biscuits, because they can't afford the rising cost of food. There's a scarcity of milk powder. So many, not that we are promoting milk powder for children, but then it's required for the poorer sections of the society. You can't deny that, right? So the food insecurity is a significant problem. So when you have lack of access to energy, this is going to aggravate. How does it aggravate the food security? Lack of access to energy, particularly fuel, wood, or alternative sources such as now middle class, they cook gas, and in small restaurants or even big restaurants, they use gas. So there is, when you shift to alternative sources of fuel, there is increased indoor air pollution associated and with associated ill health. We know that, respiratory diseases, respiratory disorders are there due to indoor air pollution. This can aggravate because a household which has been using gas, for example, is now using firewood, then that is going to be harmful. Then they will probably shift to food that does not require a lot of cooking. We know traditionally, culturally, the Asian food requires cooking. Then also your more time is spent on fuel, firewood collection, and also the income that you have, you will also spend to buy firewood. I mean, it's so unbelievable that in the times of current time, we could see the households being served online. You can buy firewood, unimaginable probably a couple of months ago. Online you can order firewood now in Sri Lanka, and it's only for even for the middle class. Then now when you switch to, sometimes when you don't have firewood, you switch to other sources of energy, dung, cow dung, burning cow dung, or crop residues. So this results in poor labor capacity, poor nutrition and health, less time and resources available for other productive activities. Then also, if you use alternative sources for fuel which are used for agriculture, for example, like manure or residue, then again that affects food production. So an increased demand also for land clearance to get firewood, I think, is also disastrous for the environment and also for agriculture. So a combination of this, the cumulative effect of this is reduced food insecurity, reduced food security or nutrition security. So how to address this? So the example is, now we are doing a kind of an interim measure because people are suffering due to food shortages in the country. We launched this on the World Health Day on the 7th, last Thursday, a campaign called We Are One. It's a national initiative that enables every one of us to help dispel hunger in others in any way we can. It has 3 elements: setting up community kitchens, particularly for children under 5 who are attending preschools, then setting up community food banks where anyone can donate, anyone can take food items, particularly dry food items, but also vegetables and fruits as well, if possible. Then promoting home gardening and really giving very selected, scientifically selected seeds and plants for the different climatic areas of Sri Lanka. Again, initially, as the seed amount to start, we will be contributing, but hopefully we are getting even the families or institutions or schools that will go do home gardening. Once they get the crops, part of it to be redonated to start another home gardening. So this is kind of I will not go into the details, but this is our response at this time. We started the community kitchen in Nuvareli. I mentioned to you earlier that in the plantation areas, the level of nutrition is deteriorating rapidly. They were a community anyway, even before the COVID or even before the economic crisis, they were a disadvantaged community. So now that situation has been aggravated. But now you see not just the plantation communities, but also in other communities, the levels of child malnutrition increasing. Therefore, we need to have sustainable community level interventions, not just distributing food packs, which also we did and do because just before the new year, and new year is a very important time where we all try to respond with some form of support for vulnerable groups. So we have initiated this program and it's continuing. Finally, what are some of the anticipated challenges and your tips to navigate through them? 3 challenges I see. The current economic crisis is going to continue. The experts say that it will last for at least 2 years, the severe part of it, no matter what assistance come to Sri Lanka. Even with the IMF assistance coming, the collapse that we are experiencing today cannot be fixed overnight or even during a short period of time. But at least for the next 6 months, can we buffer the adverse impact on the poorer sections of our community, and that is through building this resilience. So we have to have better governance. Poor governance at all levels are the challenges. The citizen has to take back the power and tell the decision makers, we need this, we need to demand that, and we need to have structures to monitor, hold them accountable at every level, monitor services, the quality of services, that has to happen. So therefore, this challenge of weak citizenry and also dependency mentality has to be changed, and that will be a challenge. Finally, as for the tips, we have to have devolved governance. Let's get the response, the resilience built at the smallest administrative levels of our country, the village and the Grama Nilgiri division. There are 14,021 Grama Nilgiri divisions in this country, 38,000 villages. And if we can develop these units through information communication technology, we can do assessments, and then we start building what we call social capital. Social capital is knowledge. Social capital is about networks. Social capital is about empowering the community to be able to take decisions and act fast in the event of a disaster. Then use of technology. We have a very literate youth population who are very technology driven. They can use the information communication technology effectively, so they can introduce the technology to build resilience in the community. Then finally, leadership development. Identify leaders who have been, who are seen now responding effectively to the present crisis, empowering them with knowledge, training, resources, material, vision, guidance. I think that will help fix our crisis. That's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that very elaborate presentation and also briefing us about some excellent initiatives taken by the Sarvodaya Movement in promoting community resilience and ensuring food security at this time. So the leadership like you is so much needed, especially by the youth, I think, because this is a multi-factorial phenomenon. You know, we have to address this from different angles. So the approaches that you have mentioned in promoting community resilience and especially promoting good governance as a means for promoting community resilience is much appreciated. Thank you very much for your time. I can imagine how busy you could be at this critical time, but thank you very much. It really means a lot for us for being here. Okay, with that, I will move on to our next presenter. The next presenter would be Mr. Firzan Hashim. We call him Hash. He's the country director of Asia Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management Sri Lanka. We have worked very closely with Hash. Whenever very bad things happen, we have been very close in many ways trying to help the communities, and Hash has been instrumental in bringing enormous amount of support to the communities and also to the health sector by different means. So while being very grateful for all that work that you have done through your partnership with the corporate sector, as well as in your individual capacity, I have the great honor of inviting Mr. Firzan Hashim to talk us about empowering the power of community resilience during challenging economic times from the perspective of corporate sector. Over to you, Hash. I will be sharing your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Will, and also for the opportunity, and also the previous speakers and who I to follow. And I learned a lot from the previous speakers as well. And I think most of the areas that you want to cover has also been covered. But then in terms of what the questions that you had asked, Dr. Noel, I would be covering through this presentation, not in a particular order, but which is incorporated in what I present. And maybe if there's time, we could also discuss, take questions later. Just before I start, how many minutes do I have? I know that your initial was 20 minutes. Are we to go on that time or reduce the time?
We can go on that. We can go on that. I have cut short on mine, so we have saved some time.
Yeah. All right. Yes. Okay. So next slide, please. So I think it would be best for us to understand what the corporate sector means. In fact, though we talk about the corporate sector and so many private sectors and so on, we come to think about the large corporates. But I think what is important is to understand the SMEs or the MSMEs, the micro, small, and the medium enterprises. That's the key. And if you look at the statistics here, how much it has contributed to the GDP, 52% of the GDP, the contribution is through that is prior to the pandemic by the SME sector is, basically 8.8 trillion in Sri Lanka itself. So that's the strength. But if you convert that, who are these SMEs? Who are the micro? You need to add them as well, the micro enterprises as well. Who are they? In fact, they are the people who are woven into the community. They are the people on ground in providing or in fact ensuring that the larger corporates survive. So it is very important when we talk about private sector to take the MSMEs into account. So if we also look at the public sector and the private sector. Now, if you see the last area that we have, area that we have highlighted, which talks about 1.3 million, that is employed population in Sri Lanka, the public sector is 1.3 million, as opposed to a corporate sector, which is 3.3 million. But we need to add also the informal sector. Again, the informal sector. So the private sector includes a variety of these different sectors, whether it is formal, informal, whether you generate an income or whether you are a part of the supply chain. So it's very important to understand that before we go into the community resilience. Next, Doctor. Yeah, see a few things that when we approached, as I said, bringing private sector on board and linking them with the humanitarian and the government sector, what we understood was to bring resilience into businesses. It is important that there is business resilience, which is very closely linked to community resilience. If you have the business resilience stronger, the community resilience becomes even stronger. An example is that we approached a massive, big corporate where they had so many girls who were working in the factories, and to ensure that we bring in the business resilience, the corporate, the resilience to the community. When we addressed these 30,000 employees, we really understood the importance of business resilience, but we incorporated the community resilience also into them in terms of awareness. So when these girls go back to the community, they share this with their relatives, their immediate relatives, as well as the village as well. So when you address them in a corporate under one roof where you can have access to so many employees, you can in fact actually also bring up upon community resilience awareness also into them. I think this is the way that we approached, and this is what we also looked at institutionalizing in terms of how corporates should look at providing business resilience in one side, but most importantly, how the community can be resilient in terms of whether it is climate change, whether it is reducing risks, and also the new concept of now what comes into the economic resilience as well. So when we did approach this, when we do approach private sectors now, we also bring this element of reducing risks. So when you reduce risks, it turns into profit, but also it turns into saving lives, saving your property, and also being very resilient in terms of how you would take care of your business, but also your livelihood and your family itself. But I think one of the important discussion that we all talk about is we talk about community resilience, the word resilience. But we talk about resilience in the current context, whether it is today or in the next few months or so on. But I think resilience, community resilience should go beyond that. How would we prepare communities to be resilient in the next 10 years, next 15 years, next 20 years? So that is the key. It is not only about looking at resilience for the moment. As Dr. Vinaya and Indu also said, where are we now? Did we anticipate this economic downtrend, which will lead to such a level? But you see, are we resilient to this? Are we prepared for this? But why didn't we look at that? So it is important that we don't look at the context of the present context of being resilient, but more about what would happen in the next 10 years, next 15 years, and how we could be resilient to that. Next slide, please. Okay, let me come to this about how businesses can be resilient. See, we all spoke about providing food to the people. Sarvodaya is looking at doing a great initiative at a time like this, but it is very important that the corporates are able to continue with their work. So that is what we call business resilience. Is it possible for them to deliver the goods from A to B? Food security. Where does food security collapse? This is again the supply chain. When the supply chain breaks somewhere amidst, then you will not be able to deliver what you want to deliver. So if you look at this resilience, or if you look at how resilient corporate businesses or the people should be, if we are not resilient, the businesses will continue, because we are talking about a global context. When you talk about a global context, the production, if you take the production, the second largest revenue that we are talking about in Sri Lanka is, basically the exports, the garment exports. What's happening now? If you look at the garment exports for the last 3 months, it has been record productions and exports that we have done. And this is something nobody would believe, given the current crisis. Until March, we had record exports and production. But that comes to a standstill as at now. As you can see in the slides, what happens? We need the global trend is that they need the market, they need the supplies. Then if we can't provide, they will go to the next close supplier. So in the current context, the next supplier is also full. If it is Bangladesh, whether it is Vietnam, and they are looking at India. So then there is also this objective of the other countries profiting because of our failure. So it is very important that the businesses are resilient, and like the previous speakers spoke about, how can there be good governance? Next slide, please. In terms of market supply chain, when we talk about basically how we would invest. Now, if we are investing in a particular thing, now if you talk about infrastructure resilience is something which is very important. It can be local infrastructure development, but you would also see another aspect to it. You would see a social impact. So as earlier discussed about, socio-economic crisis that we are having, the infrastructure has to be stable. Infrastructure also has to provide that access for the supply chain to move from A to Z. And that also should incorporate the social impact. So this is what we call infrastructure impact. That is important to understand impact infrastructure in our future developments that we need to do. So under this context, if we are looking at a supplier, a manufacturer, the distributor, retailer, and the consumer, this ends up with the market supply chain. If we are unable to provide this, there is no business resilience. And if we are not able to provide that particular chain to function in the norm it has to function, we would not have food, as initially spoken about by the two speakers. We would not have the transport capacity. We would not have the income. Now, if you take the current impact that we are having, it is about Forex. But if you look at the Forex, that is a foreign exchange, this is something which was bound to come. When you look at the debt, when you look at the infrastructure that we had, and the returns, which we call the return on investment. So based on that, are we able to create that profit? Are we able to attract that important Forex into the country to pay back our debts, or even to get our essentials that is required? So it is important to understand the market supply chain that has to keep going. So in terms of how we are trying to keep it alive is APAD, and also in terms of advocating with the rest of the corporates and the government, is to see how best the MSMEs could survive. It is very important that the MSMEs survive, because this is the supply chain key in bringing, even if it is food, whether it is medical supplies, whether it is health. In all these contexts, what we need to understand is how we bring these supplies from the manufacturer to the client, which is the community or the guy who is buying this stuff. Yeah, next one, please. Right. We were talking about which elements, I mean, I think this was again addressed by the previous speakers also. If you look at these elements that you have indicated, governance become key. Leadership was spoken about, but it is very important that there is proper governance. In terms of governance, it is also not an individual, but it is also collectively in different tiers. If whether it is at the national level, whether it is at the district level, divisional level, or at the GN level, how it is governed. How can we bring this together? How can you incorporate the community into that? Because for us, in terms of businesses, if you look at the community, they are clients. If you are to sell something and profit out of it, you have to do it with the community. So the benefit should go to the community. If not for the community, if they do not have the buying power, there is no businesses. There are no businesses which could profit. But in terms of that, this is a collective responsibility that needs to come upon, given the current crisis that we have, where we need to understand what the priorities are in terms of the critical needs as at now. If it is Forex, if it is in terms of bringing in dollars into the country, what is the priority? What are the mechanisms that we have? We have mechanisms, but are those mechanisms being maximized? For example, if the dollars have to come through the banks, we have to create that access to ensure that the banks do have that capacity to take in the Forex and also give the better return to the community or to the people or the businesses in terms of how they would profit. If not, they would get the best out of what they earn. In terms of representation, yes, there is again a representation which is required from different areas, whether it is the business community, whether it is the academia, whether it is the NGO sector, whether it is the private sector or the others, but the representation has to be holistic as well. So it is also important in terms of participation, how best the corporates can get involved. They need to get involved with the community. Who are their clients? Who are their prospects? Who are their manufacturers? Who are the guys who are the smaller or the micro industries? So it is important that the participation needs to come, but here again, end of the day, it is about public-private partnerships. So all these are important in terms of bringing a holistic approach to ensure that this current crisis has to be solved. So again, in terms of resolving the current crisis, there is so much to do, but firstly, it is about bringing stability. Even anybody locally or internationally who wants to work with Sri Lanka or bring in a solution, there needs to be political stability. There also needs to be good governance. So the risk knowledge finally would be one of the key areas that we need to bring about into the communities. In corporates too, when we talk about business resilience, we talk about the risk factor. Earlier, the risk factor they talk about, it is more financial risks, but now it is about this holistic, whether it is climate change, whether it is the health factor, and of course now comes in the economic aspect of it. This needs to be conveyed to the community as well. So the risk knowledge is important at the ground level as well as the macro and at the micro levels as well. So I would leave it at this now, and then maybe we can discuss if there are any questions here. Dr. Noel, over to you.
Harsh, thank you very much, Harsh, for that excellent analysis and the presentation from a corporate sector point of view. And it is very important that we look at this crisis from a sustainable point of view, because whatever the emergency assistance or emergency solutions cannot take us long unless we find a sustainable solution. So it has to be through an economic solution where we increase our production services and try to get more foreign currency. I can see Rohan's hands up. Rohan, if you don't mind, we have 2 more presentations and we will have the questions at the end of that. And you could just hold on your question or put it on the chat. until we move on to the next one. So thank you very much, Harsh, for that very elaborate analysis and overview, and also about some work that you are already doing much earlier than the crisis to enhance the resilience. Now all these things have a very large gender dimension. So, most of the women and girls are disproportionately affected by these issues, whatever the disasters, emergencies, crisis, or the financial crisis that we are looking at. On the other hand, they are the cornerstone of resilience. How are we going to come out of this at family level with its nutrition, or household level, children's education, or in the corporate sector, whatever. So the real leadership comes at community level, probably from women. So in that sense, it is a great honor to have Ms. Manu Tissera. She is a development consultant from Sarvodaya. She has been working in gender and communications as a specialist in the area. And Manu is currently, he is the head of the Awareness with Human Action project of the Sarvodaya Movement, a project aimed at promoting the community resilience and building back of societies during these challenging times. Prior to that, he has worked at the US ULEAD project in the Plan International and Institute of Policy Studies and and she's also a fellow from the Institute of Management of Sri Lanka. She is also president of chairperson of Wisdom Plus, Sri Lankan chapter of a global community of Sri Lankan professionals working across the communities. So without much ado, now I have the great honor of inviting Ms. Manu Tissera to tell us from her perspective, how does she see the whole thing from a gender perspective, and what is the role of women and girls and the gender dimension in making our communities more resilient during this financial crisis. Over to you, Manu. Thank you very much for joining with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nabil, and thank you for the invitation for me to participate in the forum and also share some insights and some observations of how best women can contribute in the whole community resilience process. I hope I can be heard.
Yeah, we can hear you. There's a small slide breakdown on and off, but let's try and I'll give you feedback on that, Manu. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, if you still have, I can switch off my video and try sharing my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, now we can hear you better, but maybe you can start sharing the screen and then I think it would be good.
Sure.
Yeah, we can see your screen now. Or maybe if you could go to full screen mode.
Yeah, okay, so I think it's now on full screen.
It is not yet, Manu.
It is not.
Not yet, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I can see it in full screen, but
Maybe stop sharing and
I stop and I start. Okay, I start.
Yes, start again.
Is that okay now?
Not yet,
Okay.
but we can see, but it's okay. You can continue. We can see your slide, but not in full scale, but we
Okay,
can.
so I'll go on. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So I will be focusing today on the role of women in building back better. And I put this adjective effective because I thought by default it's an effective role that women play. So I hope that Dr. Noville and the resilience team will accept as well as the audience here. So, well, just to kind of give a background to kind of what went in my mind is that the entire the discussion that will be doing today will be based on few things. Like I will be looking at the whole the resilience. I have looked at the resilience framework for emergencies, community resilience framework in disasters and emergencies, and I have few add-ons. I'm not sure whether that will come in the form of add-ons or they're already been there, but it's more of an elaboration. So, so I'm looking at it more as from resilience from a gender perspective, as input from an enabling environment, resilience as a skill, and then I'm also talking about a little bit about empowering women, and then like stages of women empowerment, and then what is our final impact of the whole process. I think as Dr. Noville initially said, it's about well-being or growth or the change that we would like to see. So throughout the slides, you will see these underlying factors here and there. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up at the beginning. So what I've done is when I look through, I think congratulations on the framework. I think that's very comprehensive. So I was kind of also trying to understand and try to plug in what we have been working throughout on gender perspectives in development work and how these things can be influenced to make the frameworks policies more comprehensive. So just to kind of, just to share with you some thoughts on the framework. So we are talking about, I have grounded my thoughts here on Dr. Masso's framework that she has one part of it and some parts of it which I am contributing to, and I'm trying to kind of, expand the whole thinking around. So as inputs to the framework, I'm looking at from a whole gender perspective, the enabling environment. I saw the different environmental aspects have been put in, the social, the physical environment, the political, etc., the external environment. So we're looking at, on gender, we're looking from an enabling environment point of view, from the people's point of view, practices, attitudes, behaviors, as well as policies, budgets, framework. So that as a major input into this whole framework. Then we are assuming resilience as an impact, as well as resilience as a skill. So that we will, I think, explain and we can talk about in after the presentation. And we're looking at empowerment at 3 levels. That is representation, participation, as well as influence to make. From a gender lens, what happens is representation and participation by default, it is well covered within most of the frameworks and policies, but where we really lack and where we see the gap is in terms of influencing the decisions. So we've kind of looked at the RPI, representation, participation, and influence decision. And we've also considered
Manu,
leadership.
give me a second.
Yes. Yeah.
At what slide are you in now?
Oh, you cannot see the second slide yet.
No, that's the thing. We are still on the first slide. That's why I wanted to interrupt. Sorry about that. If you could move to the second slide.
Okay. In my in my slide, I'm in the second. Are you now?
Maybe,
can you see now?
No, we are not seeing. Maybe you have a second screen and you are sharing one of the screen. Yeah, now it came early. Yeah, now it's back. But earlier we saw the second slide.
Okay, so I will go back and get the slide out then every time.
Yeah. I think it's in the second screen or something.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about it.
No worries. We are still seeing the first slide.
Oh, I think something, okay, so let me stop sharing and I'll.
That's good. Now we are seeing it. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So these are the, so I think you can follow with my presentation. So we are in leadership. So in terms of leadership, we are actually assuming in this framework leadership as a means of achieving. So the medium towards achieving improved well-being and resilience as an outcome. So these are the inputs. So in terms of outputs, so it's also about influencing, learning from and influencing policies, increase knowledge and skills, especially of women and girls, from a very gendered perspective to mitigate risks, and inclusive, accountable and coordinative systems policies. So those are kind of the immediate outputs of it. And then the more vulnerable communities are more resilient. So that's a given, that's the outcome we are working on to see to ensure how this could contribute towards more vulnerable communities becoming more resilient, and then the impact would be at the end of it. We're looking at improving well-being. I think there's nothing like really new coming into this from a gendered perspective, but I'm sure there are a few elements which I want to elaborate and see how best we can, if there's an invitation to include some new elements or thoughts into the framework. So I shared it with that purpose and of course for discussion going forward. So now I'm in the third slide. Is that slide visible, Dr. Noville?
Yes, you can
Okay.
put it to full screen now, probably.
I think when I go to full screen, this issue comes, but
Okay.
is
No
this
worries.
okay?
Then be in the normal slide. That's okay. Yeah, we can see.
Okay, thank you. Sure,
Yeah, thank you.
okay.
Yeah, sure.
So just to kind of understand, how the pandemic is affecting women and girls in particular. So one of the things I thought we should observe, or we should be conscious about, is that when the pandemic came in, it was a reality check against some of those prolonged inequalities in our society. So even globally, we would say that gender equality and women's participation has always been a work in progress, which is fine because it's not a state that you will achieve, the checklist achieved. But yet in some of the, if you look at our country, in our context also, you will see there had been a lot of mounting social inequalities, and gender equality had been one of them. So when COVID-19 came in, it was a testing time. It was a time that it tested on our successes to see how well we are. And the pandemic also reversed some of the successes we made as societies. And a fact is also that COVID-19 is beyond a health pandemic, and it severely impacted our social cycles, protection to education, to economy, to development work, to social solidarities, networks, to everything. And it also impacted individually, men, women, or people of all genders, to households, to nations, globally, everywhere. So in all of these instances, we saw that girls and women have been the hardest hit by the pandemic, simply because of the inequalities they have been facing and the severe challenges they have been facing even before the pandemic. So the situation became even worse on all fronts. So so therefore, a unique aspect of the pandemic was the way it was impacting women in particular, on the social side, on the economic side, political, and the environment. So if you look at So if you look at the status of women, like how, what is the composition, how women have been faring even before the pandemic. So globally, and even in Sri Lanka, we have almost 50%, half of the world population, half of our country population to be women. And globally, it's about 49% of women at work, and in Sri Lanka, it's only 34% of women. About 43% of women are in agriculture workforce globally. But if you look at Sri Lanka, majority of women are in the informal sector. They are informal sector workers, which means in healthcare services, apparel industry, domestic work, and migrant workers. And by default, these informal work are not secured by any social protection systems, any insurance, or any guarantee of a fixed income. Then also, if you look at the status of our women, I think this is a very important factor, that it is overshadowed by patriarchal values and power dynamics. This is one of the root causes for these inequalities. And also we've seen like more educated women are less probabilities of being at work. And this is so much so the case in Sri Lanka as well. So another thing in particular in Sri Lanka is that we have 25% of our households led by women. So that's a very sizable number. And we could see in terms of pandemic response as well as pandemic resilience, the important role they have played. And in fact, how we have factored this 25% in our response plan, in our recovery plans and our development projects. So I think that's a gap that we need to really identify and address. And then if you look at the national decision making, you know, the fact we always know, fewer elected members in the parliament. And as well as if you look at decision making as managers and women, we have less than 27% of women out there making decisions, which means the influence we talked about is less, even less than that. So in that background, if you look at how women have been affected in the pandemic, I've kind of looked at it from three main areas. One is the pandemic had increased women's vulnerability. Now they have been already made vulnerable from the factors we spoke about earlier. And these vulnerabilities were increased during the pandemic. For example, the safety. Now, protection had been an issue that women faced continuously. And then throughout the pandemic, it got heightened. Even domestic violence, and then women at workplace, and then women in transport, all of these instances you see a mounting or a rising number of incidents. Then about livelihoods. As most of them are employed in the informal sector, we also saw so many women losing their temporary jobs, and also more women led to leaving their jobs. And you also see more inactive economic populations now for females. Then in terms of labor rights, there are rigidities in the labor rights which were not revised or aligned to the needs. So it was increasing their vulnerabilities, for example, night work, shift work, and also temporary work. Then the social space for women. Now, the social space for women, again, women have been taking a bigger role in community resilience, community development. Again, due to the pandemic, their social space has been shifting, and it has been deteriorating. Then in terms of climate change, again, women's vulnerability, directly women were affected by the constraints and the changes and climate change scenarios. Then the other thing is women's limited access to this. For example, livelihoods, access to livelihood services, opportunities, resources, and in particular leadership. So you would see that this is an ongoing, this is a continuation from the previous scenario, previous stages. And before the pandemic, it was not very positive. So during the pandemic, it got even worse. And it also, the pandemic was reinforcing some of this, for example, reinforcing the gender norms and roles, what women would do in the society, what women will do in the community, and what women can do for national development in economic crisis. And also the employment patterns, like many women who were fully occupied with permanent jobs, they left jobs because of the increasing household costs and also increasing family responsibilities. Then they are reinforced social responsibilities, what women can do in their community. Then also they reinforce power dynamics. There were a lot of incidents of violence. Then again, in terms of, even their space to work, their space to decision making was curtailed. And so these norms, these gender norms and gender norms, these situations have been reinforced during the pandemic. And if you look at the unpaid care work, it has increased, as we discussed. And also there were a lot of non-measured and non-valued work of women. So these are the three key ways, apart from that cut across all these four subsectors of social, economic, environment, and political, how women were affected during the crisis. And why I'm talking about this is, if you look at the connection between resilience and women's status of women, this has a direct impact on women's capacity to bounce back. It limits women's capacity to bounce back, and also it actually refrain their capabilities. It will reduce their space to engage and mobilize in community activities, take leadership. So it has a cyclic effect. So I've taken these specific areas as the way that women were affected, and that will affect in turn their economic empowerment, their economic motivation, as well as their resilience, their contribution to increasing community resilience. So during the pandemic, the key challenges that women faced, now they were, as many women were represented in the informal sector, there were a lot of job losses. And as a result, unemployment increased. And female, as I said earlier, female inactive economic population increased. Majority of women-led businesses, now the SMEs, majority of the women-led SMEs were affected, very badly affected, for many reasons. Now, one was that they had issues in terms of access to financials. They had limitations in access to digital services and digital platforms. And they also faced with lack of transition to digital platforms as an alternative in the pandemic because of the lack of digital literacy and access. So these were like very cyclic. These had cyclic effects, one after mainly driven by the factors we discussed earlier. Then also we had the women-headed households. They had the challenge of generating an income and also buying a produce within a very short window of time. Now that was a key challenge, especially in the lockdown times. And then rising incidents of violence. Then also we saw that added burden of family and care work. So I think in Sri Lanka, it's about 79% of our population are contributory family workers, and about 87% of their time, women spend 87% of their time in unpaid domestic services and care for household and family members. These are some of the key challenges that women faced, and that had a direct impact of women's mobility to provide services and for them to be leading some of the community work, to continue their economic activities, income generation and livelihood activities. That got a direct impact of this. So if you also look at, so I was asked to look at how women have fared in pandemic. We have so many anecdotal evidences to share that women have gained social competence and leadership. Even within the obstacles we discussed, women have gained social competence and they have been working in smaller communities. Again, I would say communities here would not, I'm not referring to the traditional communities. This is both online and offline communities. In this era, I think we also talk about the online communities as community of practice, community of change. So women have taken leadership in both of these spheres and gained competence as broadcasters, as communicators, as influencers. So there's a larger role that women have played in the pandemic time. And they have united communities. For example, in Sri Lanka, we have so many experiences, even in the project that we worked in, where I worked at Sarvodaya, that is Awareness with Human Action. Under that project, we saw women taking a lead role in communities, working with interfaith leaders and community leaders, especially in times of communal, disturbances in the pandemic. When certain very ethnic specific issues related issues came up, and they were working as moderators and peace builders. So that was one key element in which they succeeded. And women also succeeded providing care and relief for their own children and families. They kept the families together. They did implemented multiple roles, so they could, societies can face pandemics better. So that's the whole resilience theory. How do you do that? So women, as I think Dr. Noel said, they are the backbone. Women played a very crucial role in keeping their family intact, keeping the societies, and also contributing the economies, but we also should be mindful of the challenges they face. And of course, effectively managing their times. So women, so this is a bit of a positive outlook on how we can find ways to supporting more women to be taking this role, and also look at the role models who have succeeded, and even women entrepreneurs who have succeeded during the pandemic. Now, apart from what I also said, now certain other points, like women have also been taken a key role as broadcasters and also social media influencers. On online space, women have been quite vocal and also bringing out their issues. And they're not only bringing out issues at their level, but also they're bringing out issues at the very grassroots, at the rural communities. So women, when you compare to men and women with their empathetic outlook, their caring nature, they have been quite understanding of these issues, and they have been like focal points or voices for the women whose voices are unheard. And they've also, in the pandemic, women have been doing educating and awareness building work, and also doing safe and hygienic and social distancing measures, as from mask making. They've also been engaging in certain income generating activity as well, and also distributing posters, essential information, and also through social media, as we said, and working as peacemakers and mediators. So there has been a role, there have been many roles that women had been playing, and they've been successful in during the pandemic. Now, few things to note, even in that context, is that women have been leading pandemic response and recovery. Even we see in the health sector, in the development sector that most of us are in, and in some of the economic livelihood sectors like the tourism, hospitality sector. Some of the women have been, really leading some of the recovery response work, but yet they are represented less in decision making or leadership positions. They've been at the forefront, but they're not being part in the decision-making process. And so how we can encourage or how we can make that enabling environment we spoke earlier towards contributing to a more fairer participation. Then again, community-based organizations are leading pandemic responses, and they have a fair representation of women in decisions. So that's a very positive thing that we can really look at. But if you look at the government structures and more solid, rigid structures who have less number of women, and the structures themselves have kind of pushed away the participation of women in the decision making. And also another aspect that women can bring more leadership into the resilience process is by contributing women and gender perspectives into community programming. I think this is quite kind of less in case of Sri Lanka. In community programming, sometimes we practice the numbers and we want like 50% of men, women, and other genders, or certain number of percentages. But going above the quantities, also getting their perspectives into the decisions, into the processes, into designing community programs would go a very long way ensuring that we maintain gender interest and gender equality and equity in our decisions. Then also recognizing women's overall leadership and management skills. Now these, most of the times, these have kind of not been considered very seriously. For example, equitable in outcomes, fair outcomes when women in decisions. They are non-violent, nature contributions or majority. Then you talk about also risk management, because women, they usually do not take many risks as men do. So how men and women combination in decisions making can contribute to a fair and equitable decisions. Then futuristic and planning. Women are so, we have this nature of women being kind of worried about what happens next, what happens. So they look very much forward looking and futuristic. Not saying men are not, but that's one of their strengths. And their accountability, and also not giving up, kind of nature in women. Now, these are some of the leadership and good management skills that can actually contribute towards this whole resilience as a skill, as well as a resilience to achieve resilience as an impact. Okay, so this is my last slide. I'm looking at pathways to strengthen women's leadership. So one thing in generally something that we have to improve on is to ensure that women's contribution, may it be to community development, may it be to national policy planning, practice, it needs to be measured, because what gets measured gets valued. Even women's unpaid care work is not measured in the national GDP. So their social protection systems are not looked at, they're not part of the policy processes, and their worries, their circumstances are not factored in. And we are leaving out a very large number of people from our population from these national frameworks. Second is providing more opportunities, supporting women to lead community. So that's a part of this whole change in our attitudes, our practices, and our beliefs, and also doing away with our support to remove barriers so that more women can be leading. And also improve the access to public information. That's also very much, because if you look at the digital literacy as well as access to digital platforms, women have less access than men. So how, if we are to make them ambassadors, peacemakers, and resilience change agents, how they can have more access to public information. And then creating safe spaces for women leaders online and offline. I think that's quite important. During the pandemic, this was one of the factors that actually kept a lot of women out of this process. And so how we can create more conducive, maybe not regulations, but more good practices to encourage more women in online and offline action. And then measures to address violence against women. then social protection and economic support for women entrepreneurs, then also at individual level, at household level, community level, and in national policies, how we talk about equal sharing of care work and how organizations, communities can adapt certain policies, certain regulations to support so that both genders can equally share care work and family work, which is one of the deep-rooted issues that is affecting women's less economic activity. And also to ensure that data design and coordination mechanism includes gender perspectives in community resilience and build back efforts. Then finally, as women, we know that building resilience is much more than reducing our vulnerability. It also needs empowerment. So how you can consider resilience as a skill and how women can be equipped with those skills, equipped with the disaster response, contingency, and resilience skills, so that there'll be more of them into leading these processes and contributing through the values we discuss to a wholesome community process. So that's the end of the presentation. If you have anything to discuss, I'm sure you will have few questions to ask as well after this. So with this, I will end. Dr. Novil, thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manu, for that excellent presentation. So this whole issue that we are discussing, building resilience, cannot be done without the leadership of women at all aspects of the society. So you touched many examples, and also you provided how women actually help to build resilience and be resilient for families, communities during the pandemic, not only from pandemic lens, but also from interreligious harmony and conflict transformation lens. Thank you very much. It really means a lot for you sharing your ideas with us today. So we are running a little behind time, but last but not least, I am the great honor of inviting Dimantha Jayasinghe. He is from Resilience, and he is also the convener of the Youth for Resilience program at Resilience Foundation. So we are not given Dimantha the last opportunity, but it is the most important opportunity, because after framing of all this, we really want to showcase an example of how we are trying to engage youth during the this challenging time. So Dimantha will be talking to us about example of what we are trying to do with the engagement of youth. So this is a case study project in progress. Yeah, and I have questioned that we would get the recording. Yes, we are making all the recordings available to all those who registered. We have over 100 people who have registered. Unfortunately, due to the challenging situation, some of them are not able to attend. We know that. So we will share the recording. So with that, I would invite Dimantha to do the presentation. Over to you, Dimantha.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for giving this wonderful opportunity to express my thoughts. I think I am audible, Dr. Novil.
Yes, we can hear you, but we still cannot see your presentation.
Yeah, okay, let me share my presentation.
Yes. In the meantime, the questions that we received from the participants at the registration, I have posted in the chat box. If the participants, the resource persons could kindly go through them and maybe select some of them in the response session, it would be grateful. Yeah, over to you, Dimantha.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Okay, the youth in challenging financial time. As a youth, I'm going to talk about how I see the current challenging financial crisis is disproportionately affecting the youth. So, literally, I give a common answer how I see the current challenging financial crisis and so as I see we have to face lack of resources, lack of opportunities, lack of motivation, lack of financial insecurity, issues in education, as well as depressions and anxieties also. The common consequences of the above problems, youth are organizing in these days virtual and the physical protest, sharing their disappointment through the social medias, especially in Facebook. And also some of are trying to get abroad as well. Those are the common consequences what I see as a youth in nowadays. So I would like to give my personal opinion about the crisis that has affected to the youth. We know the crisis is not affected to only the youth, but I aim to talk about the effects if these crises on the youth in my point of view. So I would like to tell I would like to express a question. My question is why youth should be a youth in this situation, especially. There can be many definitions regarding the age, thoughts, and appearance as well. But I am starting with GM Trevelyan statement that how he see young person. He said, never tell a young person that anything cannot be done. I think you got my point. He just need to identify the youth cannot be done anything. Yeah. So in case of Sri Lanka, as a young people, we must see this crisis in a different way. That is my thing. That is my point of view. We know this kind of crisis has never happened in Sri Lanka. We know we don't have any previous similar experience as well. We never learned in history as a subject. We don't have this experience. Therefore, we are so disappointed with these consequences of the system. But I would like to mention a statement that I personally believe a lot of pains make the strongest man. Perhaps this kind of hurtful crisis would be making a strong young generation than ever. That's why I want to say we should see this problem in a different way. When we see the problem as a threat, we cannot see the opportunities. We should see this as a great opportunity to show to the world how we think and how we can work out of the box. That is the youth. I believe that is the youth should be in this time, in this challenging time. As the Resilience Foundation, we have so many experience with working innovative youth. We identified them V4R team of the resilience. So, okay. Those are our V4R team. V4R team is one of the team swimming to the backward of the river. They have been working with us since July of 2021. They dedicated in many times with their maximum capacity, I should mention, with their maximum capacity to success social project as well as so many projects who implemented by the Resilience Research and Training Consulting. Even the contemporary challenging time, they are working in different way to tie up their hands with the suffered people in economically. They are in the grounded level. That's why I say V4R team swimming to the backward of the river. And the V4R team is the team who drive the social service project to the grounded level in Sri Lanka. They committed to raise the people economically and they help to reduce the stress of the people. So they are making resilience in the society. That's why I want to say they are amazing. Okay, when we are focusing mission of the V4R established by the resilience is navigating the resilience to be a pioneer blue ocean organization and also tapping into the innovations and the creativity of the youth while providing them with empowering, enriching and the diversified volunteer opportunities. Therefore, they are working with us in a diversified ways, especially especially generating innovative ideas, networking with other organizations, organizing youth engagement events, organizing social media campaign, and rising community awareness as well. Therefore, they are very trained. I want to say, therefore, they are very trained and experienced volunteer officers of the resilience. We would like to introduce them as one of our strengths of the resilience. Okay, this is the one of our project, Emergency Food Assistance Project. Emergency Food Assistance Project is the one of the best alternative for raising the V4R team among the youth. Within the project, they use their young energy, innovative thoughts in effective way to raise the people who are suffering from the systematic violence. So, the objective of this project is providing dry rations worth 7,000 rupees to 150 most needy families in Sri Lanka within the April 2022. At this time, we have really mentioned this point. We are given the 3 priorities. To most efficient and effective manner is ensuring the dignity of the beneficiaries and the highest level of the accountability of the donors. And finally, the best level of the satisfaction of the volunteers. Because they are our strength and they are the key factor of this project. Okay. Funding. About the funding, we are generous donor in the Care to Share Trust in New Zealand. And we have received 1.05 million rupees. But as a responsible foundation, we did not, and we are very aware about the crisis in this Sri Lanka. And we did not request any administrative cost for the implementation. And therefore we need to spend every cent for the beneficiaries in this challenging economic time. Now I'm going to explain about the implementation of the project. We divide this project implementation in the 4 steps. First one is the registering of the V4R volunteers for the project. We already have the volunteer team, but we have specifically registered them again to verify. And second step is the identification of the beneficiaries. It is doing by the V4R team with concerning some criteria. I will explain them after that. So next one is the identification of the vendors. V4R team choose the vendors who's selling the goods in reasonable price. They recommended. The last one is the procurements, distributions, accountability, and the feedback and the evaluation. Okay, all kind of data we are used to collecting the data using the COBA toolbox application. I think you some of them know about this application. That was initiated by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of the Public and the Brigham and the Women's Hospital. This is absolutely free of charge data collecting material, and it makes easier to collecting data even we have not the power or signal. We are contemporary suffering with those things, power and the signal. No, so we are the best alternative product is this COBA toolbox to collect the data. Okay, next, our first step is the Care to Share project volunteer registration. This is the view of our volunteers registered across the Sri Lanka. You can see there is no landmark in the north and northwestern province, but we are working for recruiting the training volunteers these days. So we will be landmark in there also. The next one is the beneficiary registration. The next step is the beneficiary registration. At this time, we have identified some of specific criteria for identifying a beneficiary family. Those are, it would be a very poor income, single parent family, a person with disability, it can be who can be a daily wage, poor housing condition, or a public midwife or anyone else recommending or suggest to the growth filtering of children, poor pregnancy weight gain or anything, family caring for orphan child, they will be a they will be a beneficiary. And also, these criteria we are using for the volunteer officers, but they should have a authority. They should have a recommendation for the selecting to the beneficiaries. The recommendation authorities are Ram Niladari, public health midwife, social service officer, child protection officer, as well as a religious leader. We can use them within this using this criteria before our team will have a recommendation from the following officers. The next one is the vendor registration. The next step, third step, is the vendor registration. Registering the vendors of this project, we have highly encouraged to give their opportunities to small business who have their villages. That's why we believed if we are able to give the support in the minimum as a minimum small vendors, it would be a support to the economy of the country. That's why we are encouraging that thing. The next step is the procurement, distributions, and accountability. In this step, procurement and distribution and accountability, we have sent the money to buy the rations to the volunteer officers' personal bank accounts, and then they are going to the vendors and buy the goods from the vendors, and they have already registered. After that, they will send the payments received through the Kobo toolbox. That is the process of this project. And the last one within this, our last steps is the beneficiary feedback. There is some comments of the beneficiaries. I'm not going to talk in one by one, but you can see some of them. Well, okay, that is the biggest part, and I would like to express this part in my personal opinion. With my personal opinion, when we focus our lessons, what we have learned. In Sri Lanka, all are affected by the crisis, but we actually see most vulnerable groups are disproportionately affected. Youth could be engaged in the next one. The youth could be engaged in the identifications and serving the most needy families. Some field level government officials, unfortunately, were not cooperative in providing recommendations to needy families. That is the most unfortunately thing is that is. Because they are not some of handful government officers not given their minimum, at least minimum support to success this project. Using Kobo tool, the next one is the using Kobo toolbox forms help to coordinate the process, synchronize despite and interrupted the power supply. So those are our learns. This is our project, and I really need to mention the V4 members always have the wonderful alternatives for the barriers what they have to face. Therefore, the project implementation is very smoothly and nicely going on now. I would like to request you all, please give them a clap for the wonderful duties. I'm kindly requested you all, my dear V4 team members, if you are staying with us, please switch on your cameras for seeing your face to all. Please give your, I think if you can give them your kind clap, it's very helpful to encourage them. Okay, I really appreciate the donor of the Care to Share project. This donation is really means to us, and it's timely requirement for my country. Thank you very much. I'm using this opportunity to give them to my gratitudes, express my gratitudes for all. Thank you very much, Care to Share project and the donor to given this opportunity, and the Dr. Novil Vijaysekhar, thank you very much for giving this wonderful opportunity to me, express my gratitude and my thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dimanta. And also thank you very much to all the Youth for Resilience volunteers, as well as the Care to Share Foundation. This was like a small experiment that we do, because we had to do everything in a virtual environment during the pandemic, and now we don't have even the internet. So how can we do that? So that's why we experimented with this virtual platform where people can log in asynchronously and still manage the This is very tiny project. This is a showcase piece, just a pilot project to see whether we could do something like this. So thank you very much, Dimanta. So we are now little ahead of our time, but I think let's go for the questions. First of all, if anybody wants to ask any question in person, we will give you the chance first, and then we will go to the chat. So is there anybody who, I think, Rohan, you wanted to ask a question. I saw your hand earlier, but if you are there, you could please go ahead first, or any other who want to ask questions in person.
Hi, Neville.
Yes, Rohan, yes.
Yes,
Nice
let
to
me.
see you.
Nice to hear you. It's very informative. Let me just very quickly ask my question. I mean, it's an observation as well as a question followed to Hashim. Now, Hashim, it's brilliant as I always admire your work in terms of working with disaster and building resilience through public-private partnership. Now, you mentioned in one of your presentations that it's a very need. It's the need of the hour to engage private sector, public-private partnerships. But I'm just speaking about the current situation, the present moment. Now we all understand that the country is plunged into a financial crisis. I'm not speaking. I'm not yet to define it as an economic crisis, but we are now plunged into a financial crisis. Now, we all understood that in a financial crisis, the first group of people or the first sector to be affected is the marginalized sector, and also these marginalized group also engage in small enterprises, and then there is a small medium enterprises, and then there is a large companies or large national level institutes, and then multinational companies come into play. Now, of course, even we are taken out the multinational company, but all the other three sectors are severely affected. Now, of course, we may not have the numbers yet, but it's pretty much obvious and pretty much visible for everybody that this is going to hit hard on all the sectors. So that's my observation now. But in the same time, I'm also speaking about I have speak aloud in many forums on about this community resilience framework. Of course, it's a very common framework that we have been evolved through which is influenced by the 5 assets, the 5 social capitals or 5 assets or 5 resources. But none of these resilient frameworks have not considered the time factor, because we will all need to understand how fast that we can achieve the resilience. Now, if I take back the current condition or the current situation of the country, everybody wants to come out of this situation, especially the financial sector. Now, in the same time, because otherwise our resilient frameworks are always kept it as it's going on and on and on. But none of us has, I mean, even including myself sometimes, have not looking at holistically the time factor, because resilience means bounce back to normal within a particular period of time, because you cannot achieve or you cannot bounce back within 50 years. You cannot bounce back to your normal life within 100 years. You need to come back to normal at a given period of time. So that's my question, and that's my observation. If you can answer, I mean, I don't need a lengthy answer, but I know you are very capable of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohan. Over to you, Harsh.
Okay, as always, Rohan, very intellectual, and the questions are also like that. So thanks, Rohan. I think that is what I too endorse. See, in terms of impact on the private sector, you are very right. We started off by saying who the private sector are. If you look at it, if you take at the multinational corporates, to be very frank and to be very candid, somehow they will survive, because even if it is Forex, which is the issue now, they would have offshore accounts and they would also have transactions out, or if not, they will move their operations out to another country. And that is the reality, and that you can't blame them, because they need to have a conducive environment to work, because you can't have Forex coming in and then turning it into rupees. And then if you want, items again for them for manufacture, they can't find the dollars again. So that's the action that most of them have taken, and that would become a loss to us. But in terms of the MSMEs, yes, they are very, very, very badly affected. And this is the challenge that we have, how to keep them alive. Because as you are in the DRR sphere, if you keep something closed, a business closed for more than 7 days, 14 days, 1 month, then that's it. So there are formulas based on whether you can bounce back or not. So this is a very trying time. So this is what we are all talking about. How much can you hold? Now there is an issue again about, before 31st March or whatever, the moratorium is expiring. How will the businesses pay back? And now we just saw the interest rates going up so high. How will they again survive? So these are the issues that needs to be taken care of. And I totally agree with you when you said about resilience framework. That's what I also mentioned. We can have resilience, but then the resilience that we always talk about, I'm not sure. But for me, what I feel is we are talking about, okay, for any interruptions, any shocks, how are we resilient? How will we cope? How fast will we come back? But how fast would we come back? So this is why that resilience is required in a long-term aspect of this, 10 years, 15 years. How will you be better prepared to be better resilient? We spoke about impact infrastructure. See, when you put up an infrastructure in the development process, that's what I am also a very firm believer, build before better as opposed to build back better. Because you should look at that infrastructure impact. Now, for example, if we are talking about the health, the pandemic issues that we have, when we are building something, whether it is flats or whether it is homes that we are building, or you're talking about homes that we are building. See, if you don't have proper ventilation, if you cannot follow the guidelines related to the guidelines which comes from the health sector, the distance that you want to keep, how many people in a room, how many people in a house, whether there is proper ventilation and so on, then that infrastructure does not have an impact. So this is the issue that we have in a developing society. And I think this is a time for change. I think somebody else also asked about what this is the solution for political and economic situation as at now. Maybe we can come to that later. But Rohan, I really endorse your requirement about the time frame. If we are to talk about resilience, we need to have a time frame. Is it how fast can we bounce back? If not, are we better prepared to be resilient? And then what does resilience mean? Able to absorb that shock and continue. If you do not continue and you stay in the same place, you are not resilient at all, and you look forward to another. Because this is what we have been addressing the private sector, especially the tourism sector. Because even if we have an economic, economically, if we can come up, we have to look at how much our tourism sector can benefit out of it. And we have the infrastructure for that. We have the human development for that. But we need to understand how they can sustain, how they can actually, even we were earlier talking about, how whether you can hold on for some time during the pandemic. Before that, we spoke about the Easter Sunday bombing. Can you hibernate? But how long can you hibernate? Even if you have to hibernate, you need to bounce back or revive. So that's what we are working. I think you would have seen also in this thing that we are working with the SLTDA, the UNDP, and so on to make these guys, bounce back fast. But I don't know whether I answered you right. But I leave it at that if others want to add on. Yeah.
Thank you, Ashim. Well, that's a partial answer, because I'm not expecting you to answer the for the entire question, because it's you cannot be answered. But of course, my question was followed by the comment, because what I understand is it has to be looked at in a different way. We have to think differently. That's the point that I'm trying to raise, because we are looking things very conventionally over the years, because because what I understand from working in the other parts of the world, because our things are not transformative, we are not progressive, but we need to understand, we need to have a transformative as well as progressive framework. So that's my comment. Thank you very much, Noel, and thank you, Hashim. Thanks a lot. I'm seeing you guys after a long time. Thank you.
No. Yeah. I agree. I think we have to be much more innovative. Certainly. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I see a small question actually that came from earlier. Maybe it goes to Indu. We are being asked, can we have an example of an idiosyncratic shock? Because there were two things, like directly shock, and if you could briefly tell us, Indu, it's a new terminology for many of us. We have never looked at shocks like that. So if you could kindly.
Yeah, well, I mean, these are sometimes terms which we use in different contexts, but to have a better understanding, idiosyncratic shocks means that these shocks or the stressors are very much confined into one household or, few households, very much limiting very unique nature of such stressors. It can be compounding or it can be direct as well. So that is how it's been classified. So different communities, they do have different types of households based on their engagement of livelihoods, based on their different capabilities, adaptive capacities. So which defines this particular nature of stressors into that particular locality, where it is not shared by many of the communities or many of the households together. But I would like to take another point in your initial question about research and participation, research on resilience, building resilience, community resilience. Yes, of course, you do get several opportunities, especially with academia, different universities in the country, not only in the country, but in the globe as well. There are certain instances that they are conducting symposiums, various other forums where you could do certain interventions such as research in this particular sector, risk sensitive planning, disaster risk reduction, and of course development as well. So it is you need to little bit do a search on that, where you could find these research opportunities. And there are certain agencies in the country like National Science Foundation, the Institute of the Research Institute in the country, and of course certain universities as well. And this forum itself is of course an opportunity as well, where you would see certain avenues for you to work on. And it is not always the opportunities, but you could create your own opportunity where you could contribute more and more in this space. And then I put certain my thoughts into the point discussed by Hashim a while before about the frameworks and how, of course how best that we could bounce back from this nature of intensive category of a shock or stress, where it is beyond from everybody's capacity. So you need to have certain transformative approaches to build that particular systems to support everybody else. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Indu. And there was another question in the box. This is at registration. We have asked, is there any measurement that have been taken to significantly oversee how local faith-based community, youth, teens, and children and their contribution are rightly positioned as building blocks for accelerating the community resilience in the new era of technology, information, and spirituality. I think over the pandemic also we have seen that faith and religious leaders are playing a critical role. For example, we did some AHA project funded project. Actually, we did a research and we found through qualitative interviews with religious leaders that there are 8 different roles that religious leaders could do during the pandemic. And also now we are coming to the unfortunate anniversary of the Easter Sunday in few days time. So 20th of April, we are organizing a similar forum to discuss the role of religious leaders in transforming violent religious extremism. So you all are invited. We will share the invite as well for that. Because our complexities and all these conflicts can get worsen in certain situations, but I'm very happy to see very positive developments. Even this, that is, I think, one element of resilience is that all the challenges that we had, like divisions, ethnic divisions, religious divisions, and even political divisions at community level, they are being ironed out, and people are uniting as one nation, which I think is amazing. And that is the ability of community resilience, to go from where we are. However, the unfortunate thing is we forget these things very easily and we revert back to our normal default of division. So if you don't do that, I think I'm very happy that religious leaders, including some women religious leaders, are here. So I think we could work with them to get things better. So the aim of this solution, because some people have asked what would be the solution for the current political and economic crisis. Actually, it is at a macro level. Like this is just to bring attention on how better we could organize at the community and civil society level. So these are some inputs. And also there should be ways that we could channel the energy and the motivation of community towards helping each other as well. So yeah, Indu, you wanted to add something? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just to give some infringement to your points. I mean, the basic phenomenon is in the mainstream. There is no such dialogue to incorporate all these different elements into the planning or rather so-called development. So that is the challenge ahead us, and of course this nature of dialogues are really critical, that we must as practitioners and people who are really in the field, to as Dr. Vinya mentioned, that to influence that the faith-based organization or other faith-based forums, religious-based forums, youth forums, which is really critical, is to influence. I mean, we see such influence at this point in Sri Lanka, not only in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan and various other countries as well. So this is the avenues that we have to create, because the government frameworks and approaches are very much confined into their own agendas and not thinking probably out of the box. So that is unfortunate most of the time, but we as the practitioners who need to push this and get along for the implementation. So I mean, building resilience is not a single day approach. It takes decades and so on and so forth. But the important factor is how best that we will bring these different aspects into the macro level and to micro level as well, for building cohesive society with adequate regulations and resources as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Indu. And I really resonate with what you just mentioned. We have actually very fortunate to have some participants from Pakistan as well joining us, because we are probably going through the same kind of crisis in very same aspect. So there are a lot of things that we can learn from each other. We have participants from Indonesia joining us in this, because there are a lot of we can learn from each other. Yeah, so are there any other questions or comments? I think I have tried my best to answer most of the things that were submitted during the questioning at the registration, and we will share all these presentations and the
Dr.
yeah.
Novel?
Yes, Harsh,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question about, the resilient research approaches where independent researchers could bring in their research. Yeah, I think certainly yes. APAD is also opening up a separate website for research in disasters, and resilience will be one of the key. And you all can certainly submit it to us, and we will keep that on board. And it will not only locally, but it is also linked to all our APAD platforms in the Asia Pacific region as well. So that is something that you all can share. Then there was a question about psychosocial aspects that it has been brought into the scenario. I think it is very, very, very important in terms of how we adapt, if not, how are we looking at it? Because it doesn't start now. It already had that effect earlier to a certain category of people during the Easter bombing, then followed up hugely with the pandemic lockdown and so on, job losses and working at home, the issues related to that. Then now we have this current crisis. So I think that needs to take a lead role, though it is not one of our key strengths. The others who are in this area need to take that forward and link it with all their programs as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Harsh, for bringing that up. Psychological first aid, it's very important. And linking with the previous question, role of faith and religious leaders and youth, civil society organizations, the key thing in the psychological first aid that anybody with a good heart and intention to help the others can provide it. So it is very important that everybody refreshes the knowledge. So probably we have Dr. Lahiru here and some others who are being trained on psychological first aid, and we could definitely organize something virtual, some refreshers, especially how we could help communities to be resilient from a psychological point of view, because it's very important. And majority will not need anything, they will be resilient, but there would be a small proportion who need little push, and there will be another tiny bit who really need, who can really go into really the extreme. So like it is very important. Harsh, thank you very much for picking up on that. Dr. Lahiru, do you want to say a few words about that? Like you have the Association of Disaster Management, the health sector disaster management professionals. Maybe we could do something together to offer some kind of a refresher on psychological first aid in this context. Would you like to comment on that? Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Lahiru. And in the meantime, I would like to thank Dr. Lahiru Poditoakku and Dr. Darshani for being our interpreters. So we have learned a lot from the Zoom, and we find that we can provide trilingual translations, which is actually very important that we understand each other, because that creates the biggest divide among us. So technology can be helpful. So I would like to thank both of you for doing an amazing job in translating. If there are any other questions or anything that you want to mention, I think we will end the session because we are a little out of the time frame. So I would like to thank our panel of experts who participated today for this session. We organized this session with the support of the several organizations: Sarvodaya Movement, Asia Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management, World Food Program, and Resilience Research Training and Consulting, and Resilience Foundation. All these organizations, they supported wholeheartedly, and all the staff and these organizations contributed pro bono. There was not a cent involved in the whole thing. They all came, and all the consultants, they're very busy people, they all volunteered to do this session, because we need to look at this problem from different angles, try to help helping the community. And I would like to also to thank the speakers, Dr. Vinya Ariratna from the Sarvodaya Movement, and also Harsh, who is always being with us from the APAC, Indu Abhiratna from the World Food Program, and also from a very experienced expert from the field of disaster risk management and community resilience, Ms. Manuti Soira from Sarvodaya, and also Dimanta Jayasinghe from Resilience Foundation, representing all the youth volunteers, Youth for Resilience volunteers. We have very big thank for all of you who are doing amazing job, going to households, identifying people, and trying to help the people in whatever the small way, because most vulnerable people are disproportionately affected. And then we thank all the participants who came here. Thank you very much. And all the recordings as well as the presentations, with the permission of the presenters, we will be sharing on our YouTube page, and we will share the links. With that, let me conclude the session. Thank you very much for everybody's participation.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.